So I've been asked, why build a distillery in Louisville, Kentucky? Well, I'll tell you, there's some magical things about Kentucky. And aside from water and the weather, one of the most important things about Kentucky is that it is the epicenter of bourbon in America. And this is the place where you have the expertise. That was one of the main reasons that I chose Louisville, Kentucky. I wanted to be with the big players in the big leagues and play in the majors. Now, why an urban distillery? You know, Rabbit Hole is essentially a modern brand that is trying to, in some ways, push the envelope on innovation, be able to create new products that build on the tradition, but really is forward-looking. What I'm really excited about, what I always think about, is that the romance of bourbon is not 100, 150 years ago. It's about what's happening right now, and it's what's going to be happening in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And for me, Louisville is the place where not too long ago, there used to be over 200 bourbon-related businesses and distilleries here within a stone's throw of NuLu. And for me, to be able to be part of the group that resurrects and in some ways reinvigorates the neighborhood and brings back the old glory days of Louisville was just would give me goosebumps even thinking about it, because I think ultimately I wanted Rabbit Hole to be positioned as a brand that is building on tradition, but it's really moving forward. When I started thinking about designing the distillery, in conversation with our architect, Doug Pearson, there were a couple of thoughts that were top of mind for me. One was building and designing a distillery that embodies our philosophy of transparency. So the glass and steel structure, as an example, was really a nod to that. So no smoke and mirrors, you guys were able to see everything in full view. Back in the day, there were a lot of horse trading in the bourbon industry, and I wanted to make sure that Rabbit Hole pierces through that so you guys can see exactly what we're doing and exactly what you're getting. Now, the other thing that was really important in conversation with Doug was I wanted to create a distillery that has a full sensory experience for our guests and visitors. What that means is to build and design a place that is a full functioning, high-powered distillery that also serves as our hospitality center. So Rabbit Hole is an exceptional design and building because not only it is a high-powered distillery, we're pumping out 27,000 barrels a year out of this facility, and we're in operation 24/7, 365 days a week. But on top of that, we have guests, visitors coming in and literally walking through the fermentation tanks, getting up and close and visiting, seeing the still and every aspect of our operation. So that kind of marriage of hospitality and manufacturing was part of the vision, and I'm really proud that we were able to do it not just anywhere, but in the heart of Louisville, in NuLu, which is really one of those established neighborhoods right between downtown and older neighborhoods like Cherokee Park here in Louisville, allowing us to bring in, attract folks that are visiting us on the Bourbon Trail, but also the locals, part of our community, that we want to make sure that they feel proud and are part of our experience here at Rabbit Hole. You know, I fell in love with NuLu in Louisville probably as early as I moved to Kentucky back in 2008. At the time, NuLu was not much of a neighborhood. The only building that was built and up around here was the Green Building, which was the first LEED certified building here in this neighborhood, developed by a dear friend. His name is Gil Holland. But then the recession hit and not a whole lot was happening. So fast forward to 2012 when Rabbit Hole was incorporated. One of the first places that I started looking at was NuLu. And the challenge was, how do you build and design a distillery in basically an urban setting? Now, the business side of it, really every possible point that I was thinking about would indicate that I should go to a rural area. But you know, when I thought about what the brand represents, what Rabbit Hole is about, I got more and more convinced that we have to be in the city, and NuLu is essentially the best place for us for multiple reasons. Aside from the fact that it's between downtown and established neighborhoods, it's a neighborhood that actually needed and required revitalization. And for me, it was really exciting to be able to create a business, build a distillery that allows this neighborhood to really, like Phoenix, rise from the ashes and essentially create jobs and become a feather in the cap of not only the city, but also this neighborhood. Now, there were a lot of challenges at first. This building, actually, when we first purchased it, was an old tire factory that was abandoned, and actually our friends and colleagues from Mint Jeweler Tours used to park their vans here. And when I looked at the building, it just seemed like a potential nightmare scenario because there's a lot of work that needs to go through it. But when we looked at everything in terms of the footprint, in combination with our architects and design team, decided that this is probably something that's doable. But in terms of degree of difficulty, I would say it's a 10 out of 10 because the footprint and the space that we had to operate on is so small, and managing, maneuvering around these city thoroughfares and avenues with a lot of traffic was quite a challenge. But in the end, I think with the assistance of the city, I think I have to give kudos to the mayor and the city, who was extremely supportive with his team to help us make this dream become a reality. We were able to make it happen. Most people don't know that when I started in 2012, I didn't have a whole lot of resources. At the time, I couldn't even find, believe it or not, a bank in Kentucky that understood whiskey as a commodity. And I had to scour the state to ultimately find one bank that I had to literally walk them through and educate them on the 101 of bourbon and whiskey to be able to ultimately extend a line of credit for me to be able to start the business. With that, there were still a lot of challenges because it costs a lot of money to be able to build a distillery facility like that and to be able to ultimately build a business and scale it. So I had to go all around the state, and essentially, I think I made probably about 1,000 plus pitches and ultimately raised about $18 million to make this happen. Now, the money was not from big venture groups. These were all started with personal money and then friends and family, and ultimately probably about 100 plus individuals, very small investments that together it added up to $18 million.